Hello and welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome to All Geeks Aside, a podcast dedicated to the history of all things geek, from comics or manga, be it a person, group, or perhaps even an object if one is requested in the future. I'm your host Teddy and I will be your guide through the vast and inspiring stories. Some might be a little bit weird. And this week I am doing one of the lesser known DC characters, even though he is in fact one of the original founding members of the Justice League. Not only that, he is king of the lost city of Atlantis. Yes, he is Arthur Curry, Aquaman. So, in my mind, for all of us to have a fair and equal footing in all this, I want to look into the myth and legend of the sunken paradise of Atlantis and the Atlantean people themselves. So the DC universe, while it is basically Earth, be it that there are many multiverses in existence, the Earth in the DC universe also had an Atlantis. But that's not all it had. There is also Greek gods, there's magic, there's metahumans, and they have Batman. So, how about Atlantis? What is it? Where is it? Why did it sink? And who are the Atlanteans? The tale of Atlantis is brought to us by Plato in his dialogues in and around 360 BC. But it was just a story, and it was discovered by Solon in Egypt in 580 BC. And here is a passage from Plato's writings. For it is related in our records how once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which, starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe, and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was at the time navigable, for in front of the mouth which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, and it was possible for travellers of that time to cross from it to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent over against them, which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surrounding it most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now, in this island of Atlantis, there exists a confederation of kings of great and marvelous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many islands also, and parts of the continent. But to most Atlantis is nothing but a metaphor, an allegory for the perfect utopian civilization. To me, I want to believe that it was real, and I'm going to examine this through the DC universe and Arthur Curry in his many missions, his many quests. So, it is said that they were above all civilizations at the time, and maybe above all that we as humans have achieved up to this point. There are some descriptions of what Atlantis resembled, and none of these might be real. It was said to be in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, for it is named after the eldest son of the god Poseidon. The great god Poseidon carved the island with the largest in the center, ruled by Atlas, his eldest son, surrounded by 3 concentric moats. Every building in Atlantis was covered in metals of all kinds, from brass, tin, and there was also said to have been a rare Atlantean metal called orichalcum, which some scholars believe to have been a mixture of gold and other precious metals. Plato wrote that the outermost wall was coated with brass, the second with tin, and the third, which was the wall of the citadel, flashed with the red light of orichalcum. He also wrote that the walls had the laws of Poseidon inscribed upon them for all to see. But where was it located really? Was it in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Maps have depicted it as a vast landmass. Others show it as a smallish island. The ancient texts state that it was located in front of the Pillars of Heracles, and there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, as it is said by Plato. It must be noted that the Asia referred to here is not the Asia we know today. So, if they had such a vast city, with such untold technological advances that they had the ability to conquer and take slaves of their enemies. Maybe it was a spaceship and left Earth and now is located in the Pegasus galaxy. From Themyscirian tales told to Diana Prince Wonder Woman, Atlantis was swallowed by the ocean, and the only thing that protected and saved its people was their king's trident, which forever changed its people. So the people have been forever changed, but how? The ancient Themyscirian tales say that people now had the power to breathe underwater, to swim as the fish, and have great strength and stamina. Some of the people also demonstrated powers of a magical nature. So how do we end up with a seemingly Atlantean alive and well? Where did he come from? Is he just some metahuman, an anomaly? Let us look at some of the stories and unravel this ancient mystery. Our story begins with some controversial beginnings. One night at a lighthouse operated by a one Thomas Curry, he happened upon a woman who appeared to come from the sea. This woman's name was Atlanta. Now, the pair eventually fell in love, and a child soon followed. His name would be Arthur Curry. As he grew, as did the questions, he was abnormally strong and able to survive much longer underwater than he should have been able to, even around the murky waters of Amnesty Bay in Maine. Arthur's mother would fall ill, and as is custom, on her deathbed, revealed her secret origins to Arthur and his father. Atlanta, you see, was an exiled queen of the great Atlantis, and one day Arthur would inherit the throne. Another story of Arthur's beginning was that during a treacherous storm off the New England coast, while Thomas was out trudging his way back home, a swell struck the vessel and capsized it. It is then that Atlanta saved him and brought him back to shore. And as before, they do have a child together, but this time Atlanta abandoned shortly after the baby was born. Thomas was the only one who knew of his birth, his origins at least, and he never told Arthur. So, we shall believe what we want with this, and we shall strive on and continue through this, since Arthur Curry does have some strange beginnings and we're not sure which is real and which is not. Plus, DC Comics does like to change things around. Now, early on, Arthur was said to have met another Atlantean, or at least she seemed to be, and her name was Mira. Stories tell of her beauty and skill in battle, and in her way of weaving the ocean as a weapon itself. During the beginning, they were said to be at odds, but only because Mira had been sent to assassinate the Prince of Atlantis. But the attraction was too great. Aphrodite had spoken and she fell for him. Pretty soon, they too had a child together, and his name would be Arthur Curry Jr. Throughout the ages, people have glimpsed Arthur performing great feats. One such person was Black Manta. He was taken prisoner as a child and forced to work on a fishing vessel. Black Manta, or David as he was then known, no surname, hated the emotionless sea, and by proxy also Aquaman, who was its ruler and or at least the representative thereof. Manta would construct a suit. Mostly it was just a black wetsuit, but to survive underwater he constructed a helmet. But that's not all it was. The eyes would shoot lasers and would resemble the head of a manta ray, thus the name Black Manta. Manta targeted the Atlantean food supply. It is clear at this point that Arthur had taken up some role as the ruler of Atlantis, and needed to also help the surfers. As king, he had many ceremonial duties, so in order to tackle the threat of Manta and the perils of the royal day-to-day activities, he had his court inventor construct a robot that was his exact double. Arthur quickly defeated Manta, but it was not before being trapped under tons of rocks, only escaping thanks to some fish. Oh, and did I mention that Aquaman could also talk to fish? One of the reasons why people in the beginning thought that Aquaman was a throwaway character, since he only had powers like talking to fish and being super strong and having the ability to probably beat up Superman. Stories tell of Aquaman being cast out by his advisors upon learning of his deceit with the royal robot. And the royal council held an election and voted in a new king, Karshan. Karshan was ruthless. His first decree as king was to cast out Arthur and have him framed for stealing a secret serum known as Serum X. Ocean Master was in fact Arthur Curry's half-brother, but more on that later. As a result of Karshan's plan, Arthur was no longer king of Atlantis, and he was now on the run with Mira, his wife, and his son Arthur Jr. During their exile, the Aqua family are resigned to hide in a cave. Let's call it the Aqua Cave. And they always had a target on their backs, especially from surface dwellers. Manta, being a surface dweller, always looking to humiliate him and continue his criminal escapades. This time Manta was running guns, but he was running guns into Atlantis. King Karshan wanted to distract Aquaman from his investigation and sent a shark to kidnap Mira and his son. Learning of this, Aquaman swims into a blind rage, and as a result is defeated by Manta. Aquaman is then imprisoned by Manta. He would break out and travel to Atlantis to confront King Karshan, but as it turns out, Karshan was actually a telepathic shark and originally a villain of Green Lantern. Aquaman faced off against the shark, while Mira and his son faced a death trap. To defeat the shark, Aquaman tricked him and forced him to absorb excessive amounts of radiation. With that, he resorts to his normal shark-like self and is defeated. With the shark having been the king and also being defeated by Arthur, who was framed by the king, one would expect that he would become king again. But Arthur had other plans. He had made up his mind. He had decided to effectively abdicate in order to put all of his efforts into being the best superhero that the surface world and Atlantis could have. Now, I know that I should have mentioned this sooner, but Aquaman was one of the founding members of the Justice League, along with The Flash, Batman, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter, and of course Superman. But up until this point there has kind of been little to no interaction between Aquaman and the League. But all that would change when Aquaman's nemesis, Fisherman, yes, I did say Fisherman, captured Arthur and tied him to his home, the lighthouse, in order to fry him. Remembering something that his mother had told him when he was a child, he imbued himself with the strength of Atlantis and broke free of his bonds, and Aquaman pursued the fisherman into the deepest depths of the ocean. All of this was for nothing. Fisherman was after another cache of weapons that I guessed he had planned to smuggle to the surface. Fisherman would not snag this prize. It was nabbed by a common enemy known as the Scavenger. The Scavenger was but a simple deep-sea diver who had turned criminal, but the fisherman was just small fish now, so Aquaman went in search of the Scavenger. Was he operating alone, or was he part of a larger net? It turned out that the villain known as Cobra was in search of world domination and had spread out his cult to the four corners of the earth and was using other villains such as the Scavenger in order to steal all manner of weapons and explosives. This discovery pushed Aquaman to seek out the League members to help him put a stop to Cobra and his cult, teaming up with both Green Lantern Hal Jordan and the Dark Knight Batman. Together, the trio would foil Cobra's attempt at destroying the fair country of Portugal. I guess you kind of do have to start somewhere with this world domination crack. With all of this going on, Arthur's son Aquababy, Arthur Jr., was being kept alive by Atlantean scientists. But Mira knew of another way. She returned to her home dimension and to retrieve it. But while there, she did run into a little bit of hostility and was too late, and Arthur Jr. sadly died. Returning to Atlantis victorious, but completely clueless to the past few days, Arthur walked right in on the funeral of his son. His wife Mira was inconsolable and lashed out at Arthur, trying to kill him. It would have to wait. A villain known as Seaquake attacked Atlantis with his sonic attacks and almost leveled the city. But Seaquake turned out not to be any normal person. He was in fact nothing more than a robot under the control of Ocean Master. Ocean Master was after an ancient Atlantean superweapon that was buried beneath the ocean floor eons ago. Aquaman would defeat Ocean Master with the help of Aqualad, but this Aqualad is more of a copy of Robin, and he's not my favourite Aqualad, so we'll get into him later. Now, the Justice League did have a satellite at this time, and it was used to watch over the Earth and keep it safe from both itself and outside sources. However, it was destroyed when the Martians attacked for the first time. After the League failed to stop the Martian invasion due to the League being ill-prepared and not as powerful as they first imagined. Because of this, Aquaman completely abandoned the League and gathered members that were willing to be 100% dedicated to the League and the Earth, and be the superheroes that the Earth needed. This new Justice League took up residence in the fair and needy city of Detroit. The new members were obviously Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, Vibe, Vixen, Gypsy, Elongated Man, and Zatanna. All mostly C, maybe D class heroes, except for Martian Manhunter and Aquaman, obviously. And as with all DC Universe's history, there are a few commonalities that all the residents go through, which determine the outcome of their lives. And the first one that we go through this is the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, maybe I should do a brief history on all these DC story arcs, and just to get the point across so that I don't need to do it in a couple of seconds with each episode. So during the Crisis on Infinite Earths, Arthur is taken to the forefront of the crisis by Harbinger, one of the main characters of the whole thing. And during the event, and on this particular Earth, Atlantis is wiped out. Aquaman is one of the heroes who meet the Anti-Monitor at the Big Bang. And once the whole thing is reset and there is only one Earth, and a true Earth remains, Aquaman stands with his remaining heroes at Titan Tower and faces the Anti-Monitor. Aquaman stands alongside his allies to protect Atlantis from the shadow demons who are attacking, but fails. Now, being Atlantean and mythical in nature, one would expect that Aquaman to have interactions with other ancient peoples. Arthur's next meeting was when he had to go into hiding. It's when the Ocean Master learned of the existence of 12 powerful crystals. These were legend to have once been gathered and held untold powers. One of them had been discovered eons ago by the mages of Atlantis, and this was the very crystal that the Ocean Master sought. Aquaman went in search of the other crystals, in a location that is very close to my heart, be it that is spelled a little bit differently. You see, Aquaman heads to the ancient Irish city of Tir na Nog, the fabled island of the immortals, and the home of the ancient Irish gods, before Jesus came into their lives. But that is what most ancient peoples did, worship what they didn't understand as godly. The Tuatha De Danann were in fact a long-forgotten Atlantean tribe. The myths tell that Tir na Nog once being part of the larger Atlantis colony and tribe, but when Atlantis sank it was split from the main island. Now, how was the once king of Atlantis accepted by the Tuatha De Danann? Well, he ended up in the middle of a civil war between the ousted ruler Nuada Silverhand, who was named for her silver cybernetic hand, which was taken straight out of Irish myth, and Eokid Bree. These two were actually sisters, with Bree in control, and upon discovering Arthur in her fair city, she put him to death in the arena as she believed him to be a spy. Now, while in prison awaiting his battle in the arena, Aquaman meets with Nuada, and with her help, the pair manage to escape. Aquaman leads quite a different life from most heroes of this time, dealing with not only villains who attack from outside, but also from internal struggles of being a king of a proud people and nation. When Aquaman would leave for extended periods of time, would-be kings would step up to take the crown. Most would do a terrible job during his absence. But Aquaman's wife Mera was driven insane and taken to an asylum at this point. And then giant jellyfish who tried to take the throne this time instead of a normal human, and they enslaved the Atlantean people. When Aquaman returned to Atlantis, he was placed in prison once again. When Aquaman is freed, he is joined by fellow citizens in rebellion against the jellyfish. To defeat the jellyfish, Aquaman and the resistance fighters resorted to terrorist attacks. With the help of his comrades, they mass-produced a poison that only targeted the jellyfish. And upon releasing the canisters, most of the jellyfish within the city were eradicated, but some of them fled. With the city free of jellyfish, you would think that they were free and clear, but this was merely the beginning. A last-ditch effort by the remaining jellyfish was to completely blockade the city, thus cutting it off from resupply. It was Aquaman who saved the city and called all manner of sea creature to his side to defeat the jellyfish. But some escaped, and I bet they would never tangle with Atlantis or Aquaman again. Now remember how I said that Mera was placed into an asylum? Well, she ended up escaping and wanted to seek her revenge on Aquaman. In doing so, she somewhat forced Aquaman to kill her in self-defense. And Arthur mourns the death of his beloved, but she wakes up in the coffin as if by magic, and she takes her leave, stating that she had caused enough trouble and was going to return to her homeland. Atlantis, at least in this universe, is now known to all of the Earth. Aquaman is even asked to become a United Nations ambassador. It is during his announcement to the world that the maleficent Black Manta strikes once again. He had bombed the conference that Arthur was attending. Then, to add insult to injury, Manta desecrates the grave of Arthur's son, just to piss him off. Manta was clearly on a mission of pain to Arthur, as he next turned his sights on Atlantis itself. He set off smoke bombs that were laced with a fear poison. Manta then just stood back and watched the city turn on itself in pure terror. Going after one's kin is one thing, but sullying his son's grave was surely what angered Arthur. Now looking at any interaction of Aquaman, I would not like to have been on his bad side. Well, Aquaman pursued his victim, almost killing Manta in the process, but Arthur realized what all heroes come to do at this point, that killing only makes you like the villain you are fighting. So Arthur doesn't kill Manta at this point. Now, mind control is quite possibly one of the powers that most terrorize heroes and villains alike. When the mentalist Thanatos, not to be confused with Thanos, who was in fact Aquaman's polar opposite or dark reflection, uses these mental powers, he manages to trap Aquaman in a dream world. Here, Arthur had no choice but to face, or even fight, however you want to think about it, his woman Mera and his fallen son Aquababy. Thanatos' plan was clearly to drive Aquaman insane, but instead, Aquaman faced his failures and made his peace. It is then that he is set free from the dream and able to defeat Thanatos. Now, Aquaman always seems to have a target on his back, usually in the service of either the United Nations or, to the lesser extent, Atlantis itself. Now, an oil baron by the name of Jordan Wiley hired an assassin, a Russian assassin, if you will, who had the alias of NKV Demon. Now, Demon is not successful in his attempt to kill Arthur, and it ends up being chased across the rooftops of Manhattan. And it is in the middle of summer, I might add, and Arthur is losing his powers because he needs to have water around him or near him for his powers to have their full effect. But luckily, it starts to rain, and Arthur is reinvigorated and ends up defeating Demon. Now, sometimes Aquaman lends his hands at crises that affect the very lifeblood of the earth and his home. When an offshore oil rig is attacked and blown up and causing a leak all over the ocean, Aquaman goes to investigate. At first glance, it appears that a group known as the Sea Devils were responsible, but Aquaman figures out that this was all a ploy. The oil rig was owned by the same Jordan Wiley who had him assassinated, or at least attempted to be, and it was all a setup. Aquaman releases the truth to the media, and thus proving that the Sea Devils were innocent. With this, and the trust of the United Nations delegates, Atlantis is finally accepted into the fold of the United Nations. Aquaman may no longer be king, but he is respected by all of its people. An old advisor named Volko divulges to Arthur that his mother Atlanta was a chronicler of Atlantis, or a keeper of knowledge. Arthur is given the Atlantis Chronicles. This was the tale of all the previous kings and all of their doings. Upon reading this, Arthur discovers that the Ocean Master was in fact his brother, well, half-brother like I mentioned earlier, and his true name was Orin. And this will become relevant later. I know I keep saying that, it will. Also, up until this point, I have left out quite a big character, but I did so for a reason. You see, Aqualad to me is a goldfish, and this Aqualad from now on is one of my favorites. This Aqualad is more like Mira. He has control over the ocean, at least a part of it, as a weapon. Upon learning of Ocean Master's true identity, Aquaman becomes very down and descends into a deep, deep depression. Aqualad tries to pull Aquaman out of the depression by telling him that a mysterious radiation leak is causing something in the ocean. But in their trying to help everyone, they wind up being captured by a group of terrorists. These terrorists were not able to hold Aquaman or Aqualad, and the pair escaped and fought the terrorists. But their leader, Charybdis, was in fact a metahuman, and one of his powers that he was able to negate other heroes' powers and steal them, and he negates Aquaman's ability to commune with sea life. Charybdis thrust Aquaman's hand into a pool of ravenous piranhas, who devour his left hand. Aquaman manages to overcome him and toss him into the pool and escape to his cave to nurse his hand back to health. When Aquaman would emerge eventually, he had a harpoon replacing his left hand. Aquaman discovered that he and Aqualad were set up by none other than the US Navy. Well, an admiral in the Navy at least, Admiral Strom. And upon learning this, he goes in search of him. Tune in for the next episode, where Aquaman fights Superboy. He gets messed up with a talking AI ship, fights the Anunnaki, and the Justice League comeback tour. Oh, and before I go, there's a couple of things I just want to say, and I'll keep it brief. Firstly, if you like this podcast, please share it with your friends or the strange family member who might like nerdy comic books too. Word of mouth, my friend, or even head on over to iTunes and leave a review or on my Facebook page. And also, if you would like to request a character, you can head on over to my Instagram, it's at allgeeksaside, or even Twitter, and request a character right there. Just leave a comment anywhere you want. Secondly, this episode and all others would not be possible without the generous patrons I have over at Patreon. If you want to help out, and even $1 would greatly help, comic books aren't that cheap anymore, and Hoopla and Overdrive only have so many comic books that I can read. So head on over to www.patreon.com/allgeeksaside and check it out. I really appreciate it. Lastly, I want to thank the amazing hosts at Supergirl Radio. They had me on their show recently to talk about Saturn Girl, and I had a great time. Their show is truly amazing. Head on over and check it out. And I can't wait until I can get on their show again and talk about some more of the Supergirl characters. They're quite fascinating, and since it's almost Superman, it's just good. Now, thanks for listening. See you next time.